So the Northwest Premier has taken leave instead of stepping down. The economic freedom fighters are arguing this afternoon that that is against the law. So to discuss this, constitutional law expert Professor Pierre de Vos joins us via Skype. Professor, good afternoon to you and welcome. Before we get to the legality, maybe just a quick political primer from you, if we can. How is a Premier appointed, but perhaps more importantly in this aspect, who is he or she ultimately responsible to? Is it the PEC within the province or a direct line to the presidency?
Actually, the Premier is appointed constitutionally by the legislature, the provincial legislature. And the Premier is constitutionally accountable to the provincial legislature. They are the only body who can actually remove him. The President cannot remove the Premier, the PEC cannot remove the Premier. Of course, then there's politics. The politics is that the Premier might be persuaded to resign because he might be threatened by the President or by the National Executive Committee of the ANC or whoever, and said, if you don't resign, then we're going to get our MPs in the legislature to have a vote of no confidence in you and then remove you that way. But an instruction to resign from either the President or the PEC is not a legal instruction that is binding. It will only have bite because it can be backed up with a threat of removal in the legislature.
All right, now let's look at procedurally, can a Premier be placed on an essential leave of absence? And in this particular case, given that that leave of absence has been signed by the Premier himself?
Yes, that is a very odd thing, because the Constitution is that the Premier, if the Premier is absent, so the Premier is out of the country, or the Premier is unable to fulfill his functions, so as would happen with David Mabuza, the Premier is in hospital, then there can be an acting Premier that takes over, and that acting Premier can be designated by the Premier if the Premier is able to do that. But there's no provision for a leave of absence, so there's no such thing in the Constitution. So I would be surprised if that is actually legally valid, this leave of absence thing, because the Premier is not absent, the Premier is not unable to fulfill his function. He was just told by the PEC or told by the PEC that he had to take a leave of absence. So it's at the very least it's debatable whether that is a legally valid move.
Professor, I suppose it depends on the definition of what fulfilling duties effectively actually mean in terms of his portfolio, though. And it would appear at this point that this is simply a political move to take some of the heat off.
Yes, I think normally the idea of unable to fulfill your functions mean that you're not able to do so because you are literally physically unable to do so. You are in a coma. You are being held hostage somewhere, whatever the case might be, or you are conflicted. So you have to appoint a commission of inquiry, but that commission of inquiry is about your own alleged wrongdoing. Then you are conflicted, then you're unable to do that. But those kinds of situations will be envisaged by the Constitution provision.
So the fact that he's not behind his desk, is it simply dodgy, or is there a degree here of illegality?
That is, the courts will have to say, of course, but from what is written in the Constitution, the courts have not ruled on this before, but written in the Constitution, if you just look at text there, the whole idea of a leave of absence seemed to be not provided for. So unless the court reinterpret the provisions in the Constitution to allow for it, it is unlawful and unconstitutional.
So if the EFF is, as it's suggesting, wants to challenge this legally, how strong a case might it have?
Well, they have a case, and especially because the Premier has said that he's taken the leave of absence on the instructions of the PEC, which you cannot do. That the PEC cannot instruct him to do something. The Premier must exercise his powers without being dictated to by somebody else. The court has already said that in relation to the President, so the same applies to the Premier. So there might very well be a case. We will have to wait and see what arguments they bring and what the counter-arguments is to be absolutely clear how strong that case is.
What type of support would he need in the legislature to secure that leave of absence, which would make it procedural?
No, there's no such support in the legislature. the Constitution doesn't really say that if the legislature supports it, then he can go on a unlimited leave of absence. There's no provision for it anywhere in the Constitution, with or without the approval of the legislature.
All right. So if this does go to court, then would this be a particularly difficult case for the Premier to defend?
Well, as I said, once again, we will have to see what our arguments are and what the arguments are that the people who challenge it bring. And the facts, the specific facts of the case, we will have to look at. But on the face of it, it's at the very least 50-50, maybe more, that he's not going to win the case.
So the fact that he's not behind his desk right now, is that tantamount then to a dereliction of duty?
Well, there's no such provision in the Constitution talking about dereliction of duty, so I don't really know how to answer that question. But the question is really, why is the Premier not doing his job that he was elected by the legislature to do? That is really the question. But this is where the politics and the law sort of conflate a little bit. And so it's not so easy to answer.
All right, Pierre de Vos, as always, thank you so much for a very insightful and entertaining take on that particular issue.